Watch right now on the Front News Project. The Ukrainian armed forces are breaking through into Crimea. Exclusive footage of Russian helicopters and ships being destroyed. Panic in the Kremlin and Russia is on fire. Oil refineries are burning across the country. And of course, the nuclear threat from Belarus. Is a planetary war really beginning? Fiery, hot, and blazing footage from the front lines. Watch right now. Greetings, Vladimir Timoshenko here with you. And let's get straight to the main point. The defense forces are masterfully burning out the country's main resource, gas stations and oil refineries. In the past week alone, 5 Russian oil refineries have come under attack. Naturally, there's panic in the Kremlin, and these attacks on military targets will only intensify. After all, Ukraine has weapons ready to strike deep into the Russian rear. Right now, we have an exclusive report from TSN Week journalist Oksana Radionova on the results of the 1,000 cuts tactic.
August has been the worst month for Russian oil refining since the start of the Great War. Never before have our forces so skillfully and relentlessly taken out oil refineries in Russia. Just this week, good drones visited 5 plants. On Saturday night, they struck Russia's oldest refinery, the Krasnodar refinery.
The oil refinery is ablaze.
And for the 3rd time this month, the Syzran refinery near Samara was on fire. At that time, the Afipsky and Kuibyshev refineries, which had been attacked 2 days earlier, were still smoldering.
There goes the 18th one.
On Monday, the Ilsky oil refinery was burning. Here's a map of the flares across Russia for the month. In addition to the 5 already mentioned, on Independence Day, there were fires at the Syzran and Novoshakhtinsk refineries. On August 19th, the Volgograd refinery was hit again. There were also successful attacks by our UAVs on August 15th, 13, 10, 7, and 2. The strike was very timely, and the end of the vacation season has a very bitter aftertaste for the Russian military economy.
At this point, approximately 30% of refining capacity has been knocked out. This affects overall trade and logistics capabilities, increases prices, and provokes inflation.
It's a paradox. The country that's a gas station has run out of gasoline. Fuel prices have reached their peak. Russians are groaning about the gasoline shortage from Sakhalin. It's simply impossible to fill up your car. All the way to Crimea.
I just arrived at the gas station to fill up. They say the gasoline is gone. Now they're giving it out with ration cards. What do you mean with ration cards? What's going on? What, have we gone back to the Soviet Union?
They never had ration cards before, never, not in any year. There was never distribution by ration cards.
The Kremlin is trying to manually control prices. They've extended the ban on gasoline exports for another month until October. And we're only increasing our strikes.
Our intensity is growing.
Our intensity is growing. More drones are being produced. More different technological tricks are being used. In particular, Russian electronic warfare is already ineffective in some places.
The main goal is to stop the oil flows that allow Putin to finance the war. That's why we strike not only at processing facilities, but also at pumping stations, successfully targeting the most sensitive spots.
That's all. That's all.
For example, on Friday we hit a strategic oil pumping facility in the Bryansk region, a line production station near Netapovichi, which pumps diesel for the enemy's army. Its capacity is 10 million tons per year. This week, the Ryazan-Moscow oil pipeline exploded, which supplies gasoline to Moscow residents. And several times, our forces have already attacked strategic facilities of the Druzhba oil pipeline. There, our defenders found the Achilles heel, the Unecha station.
It might seem like just a small station, but it's actually a bottleneck in the entire Russian oil pipeline and oil system. So, if this node is destroyed, it completely blocks the supply directly to Ust-Luga, cuts off the supply to Belarus, and from there, consequently, the supply to Europe.
Because of this strike, Belarus lost the technical ability to quickly share gasoline with their Russian brothers. Plus, the strike hit the Druzhba pipeline so hard that it left Putin's friends, Orban and Fico, without cheap Russian oil.
We have always supported the idea of and continue to do so.
We have always supported friendship between Ukraine and Hungary. In Budapest, the strike was called an attack on sovereignty, and they announced a ban on entry into the country for the commander of the drone forces, Magyar Robert Brody. He is an ethnic Hungarian, and he responded,
"Shove your sanctions and travel bans to Hungary up your ass, Mr. Bone Tensor."
But Hungarian supplies were not the target of the strike because the main goal is to stop the flows in the Baltic direction. That's where Putin's entire shadow fleet of tankers is refueled, and that's exactly where the billions are coming from. And Hungary and Slovakia can easily give up Putin's oil.
Hungary and Slovakia have an alternative oil pipeline from the Adriatic Sea and can completely stop relying on Russian supplies, but it's simply not profitable for them. There, the discount is about $100 per ton of oil for Hungary and Slovakia, which adds up to as much as 1 billion euros per year. That's a huge amount of money for these small countries, especially when you consider individual politicians.
If previously oil was shipped to the port of Ust-Luga on the Baltic Sea, now it no longer goes there, and on top of that, we have attacked the port itself.
A drone costing $50,000 destroys property worth millions and causes additional losses in the millions due to unproduced goods.
The 18th package of sanctions from Europe, which imposed price caps on Russian oil, has also proven painful for Russia. The hole in their budget is growing exponentially. The coal industry is on the verge of bankruptcy. The main coal region, Kuzbass, is shutting down mine after mine. Even in the 90s, it wasn't like this. Aviation is also on the verge of collapse. Constant announcements of the carpet plan to close airports have made flights unpredictable and unprofitable. Due to Western sanctions, finding spare parts to repair airplanes is extremely difficult. Engines are failing more and more often. Just in August, it happened 3 times. There are problems in the automotive industry as well. Sales of the largest truck manufacturer, KAMAZ, have dropped by 60%, and last year's profits fell 28 times. So since August, KAMAZ has switched to a 4-day work week. Even at military enterprises, problems with salaries have begun, and Russians who don't want to work for free are being replaced by slaves from North Korea.
Accordingly, the payment for their labor goes to the North Korean government. They receive food and a minimal amount of pocket money, so to speak.
Dark times have also come for Gazprom. Russia hasn't sold as little gas as it does now since 1985. That's why the question of where to get money for Putin's war machine has become critical. He will definitely be asking for help from China, North Korea, and negotiating with India at the SCO summit. What his dictator friends will agree to, we'll see. But it seems he won't be the one setting the tone of the conversation.
Both India and China understand that Russia is in a very precarious position. They too are starting to twist Russia's arm even more, demanding additional discounts.
But most importantly, it's our influence, be it through beavers, ferocious ones, spirits, or Palianitsias, until the gas station country loses its last customers.
And now we move to the Kupyansk direction of the front. The situation here is, as usual, extremely tense. In the Kupyansk direction, the aggressor carried out assault actions 6 times in the areas of the settlements of Kupyansk, Petropavlivka, and Stepova Novoselivka. One combat engagement is still ongoing. The previously published information from the Institute for the Study of War about the occupiers advancing along the 105 Kharkiv-Belgorod highway turned out to be inaccurate. Journalists contacted the head of the Derhachi Military District Administration, Vyacheslav Zdorenko, who, citing the commander of the 58th Separate Mechanized Brigade, denied any enemy advance east of the settlement of Kazacha Lopan. According to Zdorenko, several enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups did indeed attempt to cross the border, but they were eliminated on the approaches to the Hoptivka checkpoint. Details about what is currently happening on the front and around it are in our report.
The Russian army is intensifying its attacks in the Zaporizhzhia direction. This is footage of the 291st Motorized Rifle Regiment operating in the Orykiv area. Russian soldiers are attacking Ukrainian military equipment with drones and threatening Ukrainian soldiers on camera.
Please come back again for even more. Glory to Russia.
The Institute for the Study of War also notes increased activity in the Zaporizhzhia direction. They are convinced that Russian forces are preparing for a large-scale offensive in this area and are currently actively probing the ground.
Russia may attempt to launch new offensive operations in the Zaporizhzhia direction. A representative of a Ukrainian brigade operating in the Zaporizhzhia direction reported that Russian forces are likely preparing for a large-scale offensive in this area, amassing troops, preparing reserves, regrouping, and conducting reconnaissance in the frontline zones. The representative stated that this increase in Russian activity is the first sign that Russian forces are preparing for a larger-scale operation. He also noted that Russian forces are striking the antennas of Ukrainian drone command posts. The representative stated that Russian forces are unlikely to attack with a large amount of heavy equipment, as they did in the spring of 2025, since Ukrainian drones and remote mining have proven effective in destroying heavy equipment.
But as before, the Pokrovsk and Lyman directions remain the most intense. The occupiers carried out 37 and 31 assault actions respectively over the past day. To maintain this level of combat intensity for the first time since the start of the full-scale aggression against Ukraine, the Russian state is spending every second ruble from all federal budget revenues on military needs. This was reported by the Moscow Times, and despite such colossal spending, the successes of the Russian army are insignificant.
On the battlefield today, as we know, there are fierce battles. Today, the enemy is trying to continue its pressure in almost all directions. And although those who predicted for us at the beginning of this summer, especially some Western colleagues, a collapse and failure of the front, today they are loudly writing that, look, the Russian offensive campaign of the summer of 25 has failed. We are fighting by all the rules, and that is our strength. That is what will help us win.
The Ukrainian defense forces are giving Russian soldiers no respite even on the temporarily occupied territory, both on land and at sea. For example, GUR fighters have seriously damaged a missile ship in the Sea of Azov.
Fighters from the special unit Ghosts of the Ukrainian Defense Intelligence, GUR-MO, damaged a shipborne radar with a drone strike, while special forces from the Department of Active Operations of the GUR-MO attacked a carrier of Caliber missiles. As a result of the strikes, the Russian missile ship, which was in the potential launch zone for Caliber missiles in the Temryuk Bay, sustained damage and was forced to leave its combat duty area. Ukrainian Defense Intelligence, GUR-MO.
On the same day, fighters from the main intelligence directorate managed to destroy a radar from an S-400 system on the occupied Crimean peninsula. This radar station is capable of detecting targets at a distance of up to 600 kilometers and simultaneously tracking 300 targets. Successful defense by the armed forces along the entire front line, as well as targeted strikes in the rear and on occupied territory, only strengthen Ukraine's position ahead of possible upcoming negotiations with the Kremlin.
And now, let's analyze the operational situation on the blazing Pokrovsk front line. Here too the situation is, as usual, extremely tense. On the Pokrovsk front, since the beginning of the day, the occupiers have made 25 attempts to push our defenders from their positions in the areas of the settlements of Zaporizhzhia, Novoekonomicheskoye, Mirolyubovka, Zverevo, Udakhnoye, Dakhnoye, and in the direction of the settlements of Promen, Rodinskoye, and Pokrovsk. The defense forces are holding back the enemy's onslaught and have already stopped 22 attacks. Meanwhile, new schemes from Putin and his mustachioed Belarusian friend. Exercises for the use of nuclear weapons have begun in Belarus. Military drills of CSTO member states have started there, and planning for the use of nuclear weapons is their main focus. More on the nuclear threat from Lukashenko coming up.
Following Putin, Lukashenko has arrived in China to participate in the events of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. Meanwhile, Russian troops have already been deployed on his territory. CSTO and Zapad 2025 exercises. What is happening on the border with Belarus while the two dictators have flown east?
They'll march on Kaliningrad, cut off the Baltics, seize 3 countries, and so on, NATO countries.
Military exercises involving nuclear weapons have begun in Belarus. Ukrainian border guards have heightened their readiness.
We feel confident and calm here. We're not hiding the topics of the exercises. We say that the main focus of the exercises is practicing the defense of our territory by the joint regional group of forces. These activities are scheduled.
Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan have joined the Collective Security Treaty Organization exercises. China, North Korea, and India declined to participate.
There are statements directed at Belarus, claiming that Belarus or the Russian Federation are threatening someone, actually contradict the actions they themselves are taking.
According to preliminary estimates, about 3,000 servicemen will come from Russia. Belarus will deploy between 7 and 10,000. According to the authorities of the Republic of Belarus, the maneuvers will take place at the Lozvida and Lipetsk training grounds.
Russia and Belarus are not just mere allies. They share a truly common defense space, which they are actively strengthening due to the very complex and challenging international situation that currently prevails.
Belarus has scheduled several separate activities: training for the collective rapid response forces called Interaction 2025, exercises involving reconnaissance assets called Search 2025, as well as maneuvers for logistics units called Echelon 2025.
The defense of our territory is carried out by the joint regional group of forces. These activities are planned. This is not some sudden decision or anything like that.
According to the official version, their goal is to practice joint defensive and offensive actions.
Since 2020, a decision was made to create a regional grouping. In this way, we strictly adhere to the decisions of our heads of state. We conduct these exercises every 2 years.
The rehearsal of the use of nuclear weapons and the Oreshnik missile system has been announced. The Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already responded to the exercises.
We warn Minsk against reckless provocations. We advise them to remain prudent, not to approach the borders, and not to provoke the defense forces of Ukraine.
In Belarus, there are fears that the nuclear weapons themselves will not actually be used.
You can't use something that, let's say, poses a threat to the entire world, to global security. How do you plan for that? We'll learn.
Analysts suggest that these exercises may have a hidden goal to create the conditions for amassing Russian troops and equipment on the territory of Belarus.
We are ready for the exercises. We're not hiding anything from anyone. We are truly demonstrating openness that these exercises are ours.
Such exercises traditionally cause concern among neighboring countries due to the risk of provocations, incidents, or unpredictable actions.
We have reduced the number of troops by almost half, moved their location deeper into our own territory, hundreds of kilometers away from the border, to training grounds.
And at the moment, Russian forces on Belarusian territory consist mainly of vehicles, a limited amount of armored equipment, and personnel.
We are conducting these exercises independently, by our own decision, without regard for the countries to our west. This is to improve the training level of our servicemen and the level of cooperation between the armed forces of Belarus and Russia. We are doing this for ourselves, and essentially to show that we are ready to defend ourselves and do not pose a threat to anyone.
But the active phase of Zapad 2025 is scheduled for September 12th to 16th. During this period, an increased presence of Russian units is expected, including tanks and armored vehicles.
They don't believe it, and we don't believe it either, that it's possible to cross the Belarusian-Ukrainian border from here right now. We know what's happening at the border. It's completely reinforced with mines. It's mined, and if you try to go there, you'll lose thousands of people.
Well, of course, Lukashenko has repeatedly assured that the upcoming exercises pose no threat to either Ukraine, the Baltic countries, or Poland.
They're warning about the Suwałki corridor, that they'll go to Kaliningrad, cut off the Baltics, capture 3 countries, and so on, NATO countries.
However, back in 2022, he said the same thing about the impossibility of an invasion of Ukraine from Belarus after Zapad 2021, but a week later, he gave his territory to the Kremlin for the attack on Ukraine.
You accused Russia and Belarus of planning to invade. Yesterday, invade Ukraine. We did not invade. So your intelligence and the billions of dollars you spend are worthless.
In response to the exercises in 2025, Poland will conduct its own strategic exercises called Iron Defender, which will also involve some NATO member countries.
The very fact of the Russian-Belarusian exercises does not pose a threat to Poland. The Ministry of National Defense is taking them seriously. At present, there are no signs that these exercises could escalate into the threat of an armed conflict.
The commander of the Lithuanian army stated that about 40,000 military personnel will be concentrated in the Baltic countries and Poland.
These exercises, after the events of 2022 in Ukraine, have acquired clearly defined boundaries in terms of perception. They are now being seen not just as exercises, but as something possibly more than mere military maneuvers. Disinformation will be coming from absolutely all sides. 90% will be Russian, and unfortunately 10% will come from others. Hysteria will be fueled.
The situation on the border with Belarus and monitoring Russian military activities remain in the focus of Ukrainian forces.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Well, let's analyze the situation on the Lyman and Seversk fronts. The so-called Russian world continues to destroy, kill and maim here as well. On the Lyman front, the invading army attacked 8 times toward the settlements of Karpivka, Shandryholov, Yampil, Dronivka, and Serebryanka. At present, 3 battles are still ongoing. On the Siversk front, the defense forces repelled 2 attacks, and 2 more battles are still underway. At the same time, the invading units tried to advance near Hrihorivka and toward Serebryanka. And here is another crucial topic. European countries have proposed establishing a 40-kilometer buffer zone on the borders between Russia and Ukraine, controlled by peacekeepers, as part of preparations for the so-called peace talks. How realistic is this option at all, and how might the Kremlin's war criminals react to this buffer zone? All the details are in our report.
The creation of a 40-kilometer-wide buffer zone is an initiative being considered by European partners as part of a peace agreement, according to Politico, which cites anonymous sources. Allegedly, according to journalists, Moscow has supported the idea. There has not yet been a response from Ukraine. This is not surprising because the creation of a buffer zone would most likely mean the loss of some territories currently controlled by Kyiv. Only Jim Townsend, a former Pentagon official who oversaw policy on Europe and NATO in the Obama administration, has openly commented on this idea from politicians.
They're grasping at straws. The Russians are not afraid of the Europeans. If they think that a couple of British and French observers will stop them from marching into Ukraine, they're mistaken.
European diplomats are trying not to comment on the de facto partition of Ukraine. It also remains unclear who is actually willing to send their peacekeepers and when. So far, only the French and the British have responded positively. The commander of Lithuania's forces stated that his troops would only go to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire or a peace agreement. The authorities in Poland and Germany are opposed just like the United States. Another problem is the number of troops. At present, NATO is having difficulties preparing rapid response forces to defend the alliance's eastern flank against a possible future Russian attack. This would require 300,000 personnel. Meanwhile, patrolling along a potential buffer zone would require an additional 4,000 to 60,000 servicemen. They will not only monitor compliance with agreements, but also train defense forces.
NATO members are negotiating with U.S. representatives for satellite intelligence and air support, though they do not expect much greater involvement. Senior Pentagon officials have already informed their European counterparts that the U.S. role in any security guarantees for Ukraine will be minimal. The U.S. Department of Defense did not respond to a request for comment. The United States is possibly the only NATO country with enough satellites to provide the crucial and comprehensive intelligence needed to effectively oversee whether Russia is breaching the specific conditions of a ceasefire or a peace accord.
These proposals from Europeans, troubled by a bloody war on their doorstep, are perceived by Ukrainians as empty words.
If they actually send troops, then yes, because other restrictions on the Russians don't work. On paper, it's not worth a damn. Send missiles, send troops, send weapons. That's a question for Europe. Is there actually any real weaponry? No. Are they ready to send troops? They are, but not all of them, and not now, after the peace settlement. We tell them one simple thing: friends, you are preparing for war that the Russians will attack you. We can make sure that they don't attack. Give us troops now, bring them into Ukrainian territory now, and the situation will be over. But Europeans think we have Budapest, which turned out to be an empty piece of paper. Zero. We have the case of Ichkeria, better known today as Kadyrovshchina.
It is interesting that the Russian dictator was the first to announce the creation of a buffer zone in Ukraine in the spring of 2025. Then this statement became a kind of justification for Russian military aggression in Sumy and Kharkiv regions. After a massive attack on Ukraine, which killed 23 people in Kiev alone, the Kremlin sent Maria Zakharova to the microphone. In plain Russian, she once again voiced the Russians' conditions. The peace treaty must include demilitarization, denazification, and a neutral, non-aligned, and non-nuclear status for Ukraine. Interestingly, Zakharova made this statement on the Day of Remembrance for the fallen defenders of Ukraine. It was established at the end of August for a reason. 11 years ago, the Russians, by agreement, allowed the Ukrainian armed forces surrounded near Ilovaisk to leave through the so-called Green Corridor, but they did not keep their promises and simply shot unarmed soldiers as if at a shooting range.
Now let's analyze the situation on the Novopavlivka and Huliaipole fronts. The enemy army is acting true to form here as well. Today, on the Novopavlivka front, the enemy attacked 7 times in the areas of the settlements of Zeleny High, Poddubny, Shevchenko, and towards the settlements of Filia and Kamishivaka. One battle is still ongoing. On the Huliaipole front, the enemy did not conduct any offensive actions, but did carry out an airstrike in the area of the settlement of Bilohirya. Additionally, as a result of a presumed massive attack by the Ukrainian defense forces in Russian-occupied Crimea on August 30th, at least 1 Russian helicopter was destroyed and 6 boats were damaged. Additionally, UAVs attacked a power substation in the Krasnodar region. At the same time, Putin's subordinate Gerasimov claimed successes of the Russian army in his report. The Ukrainian General Staff reasonably refuted such claims. All the details are in our military review.
Caught 36 hours after the crime. In the Khmelnytsky region, a suspect in the murder of Andriy Parubi was detained. The perpetrator has already given his first testimony. Police officers and employees of the Security Service of Ukraine tracked down the alleged killer just 24 hours after the attack. Meanwhile, in Russia, more propaganda is being spread. Pro-government Russian media are portraying the murder of the Ukrainian politician as the elimination of one of the Euromaidan leaders with the blood of hundreds of Ukrainians on his hands.
Andriy Parubi was at the origins of the coup d'etat in Ukraine in 2014. He led the so-called Euromaidan self-defense. It was Parubi who gave orders to the snipers who shot at anti-Maidan protesters and Berkut officers.
And while Russian propagandists are busy writing another script full of lies, in the Krasnodar region, drones attacked an electrical substation, leaving some Russians without power. In addition, residents of Yelabuga in Tatarstan reported explosions, and Rosaviatsia announced the closure of the airports in Kazan and Nizhnekamsk. There were also explosions and fires in temporarily occupied Crimea. Special forces from the GUR's Ghosts unit struck military infrastructure and destroyed several targets. Among them were an S-400 complex and a radio telescope. But in Russia, despite the enemy's defeat, they continue to talk about victories at the front. On August 30th, Gerasimov summed up the results of the spring-summer combat operations. The Russian general claimed successes by the occupiers in their active advances on several fronts at once. But all of this turned out to be lies. The Ukrainian General Staff noted that these offensives by the occupiers amounted to practically nothing.
Not only did the so-called summer offensive of the Russian occupation forces fail, but in 4 years of active combat, the occupying troops have not managed to accomplish even tactical level objectives of the so-called special military operation, namely reaching the administrative borders of Donetsk region. At present, about 33% of the territory of Donetsk region remains under the control of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. By the way, Gerasimov's report contains completely different figures. Supposedly 27% of the territory of Donetsk region is under the control of the Ukrainian Defense Forces.
Gerasimov's blatant lies were even criticized by Russian military bloggers. They accused the Ministry of Defense of exaggerating successes at the front.
For the Russian side, especially the military and political leadership, it is extremely important to show at least some kind of success, even at the tactical level, against the backdrop of the blatant failure of the so-called special military operation, in order to reassure the Russian public amid the unprecedented level of personnel losses. Let me remind you that according to both Western intelligence agencies and the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, the occupiers' losses have already exceeded 1,100,000 personnel.
Meanwhile, CSTO exercises have begun in Belarus. According to statements from the General Staff, they are practicing the planning of the use of nuclear weapons during these exercises.
The nature of the statements from both the Russian and Belarusian sides regarding the scenario of the exercises, including the rehearsal of the possible use of tactical nuclear weapons, should be regarded as elements of information operations by Russian special services. It should also be specifically noted that previous information from both the Russian and Belarusian sides about the redeployment of tactical nuclear weapons to the territory of the Republic of Belarus has not been confirmed.
According to experts, the information about the redeployment of the ultra-modern Oreshnik weapon, which both the Russian and Belarusian dictators used to frighten the world, has also not been confirmed. That's all for today. But very soon on the Front News program, there will be new unique materials from our journalists reporting from the hottest spots of the war, obtained so that you know the truth. This was Vladimir Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.